The wolves had been circling her wagon for nearly an hour when Abigail Turner realized she was going to die in the Nevada wilderness. 23 years old and frozen stiff. Her dream of reaching California nothing more than foolish ambition that would end with her bones picked clean in the snow. The February blizzard had come out of nowhere, transforming the mountain pass into a white nightmare that swallowed the trail and left her stranded when her horse broke free in panic. She had tried to follow the animal on foot, but the cold drove her back to the covered wagon, where she huddled beneath every blanket she owned while the temperature plummeted and the sky turned the color of iron. The wolves arrived as twilight descended, their yellow eyes gleaming through gaps in the canvas as they paced around her prison, growling low in their throats. Abigail clutched the rifle her father had given her before she left Missouri, but her hands shook so badly she could barely hold it steady. She had fired twice already, wasting precious ammunition on shots that went wide, and now she had perhaps 3 bullets left. 3 bullets against what sounded like at least 6 or 7 wolves, maybe more. The math was simple and terrifying. She could hear them scratching at the wagon wheels, testing the wood with their teeth. One particularly bold animal kept leaping at the tailgate, its claws scrabbling against the boards. The canvas sides offered almost no protection. If they decided to tear through the fabric, nothing would stop them. "Please," she whispered into the darkness, though she did not know who she was begging. Her parents were dead, claimed by cholera 2 years ago. Her brother had disappeared during the war, his body never recovered from some Virginia battlefield. She had no husband, no children, no one who would even know she was missing until spring came and some other traveler found her wagon and whatever remained inside it. The wind howled like something alive, drowning out even the wolves for a moment. Snow found every crack and crevice, dusting her face with ice crystals. She had stopped feeling her toes an hour ago, and her fingers were going numb despite the gloves. This was how it ended, she thought. Not with the grand adventure she had imagined, not with orange groves and ocean views, but with cold and fear and teeth in the darkness. Then she heard something else. A sound that did not belong to the storm or the wolves. A sharp whistle, high and clear, cutting through the wind. The wolves heard it too. Their growling changed pitch, became uncertain. Another whistle, closer now, and the thunder of hooves on frozen ground. A man's voice rang out, deep and commanding, shouting words she could not quite make out over the storm. Gunfire cracked the air, 1 shot, 2, 3 in rapid succession. Not aimed at the wolves, she realized, but fired into the air. The wolves scattered, their courage broken by this new threat. She heard them fleeing, their paws pounding away into the night. "Hello, the wagon," the man called. "Anyone alive in there?" Abigail tried to answer, but her throat had frozen shut with fear and cold. She managed only a weak croak. "I am coming in," the voice said. "Do not shoot me, please. I am here to help." The tailgate creaked open, and a blast of snow-filled air rushed inside, along with a man who moved with quick efficiency. He carried a lantern that cast golden light across his frost-covered face. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair plastered to his forehead and eyes the color of a summer sky. Ice clung to his thick mustache and the collar of his heavy coat. "Lord have mercy," he said when he saw her. "You are half frozen. How long have you been out here?" "Since morning," Abigail managed through chattering teeth. "My horse ran off. The wolves came. I saw them from the ridge, counted 8 of the beasts." He set the lantern down and began moving through the wagon with practiced speed, gathering her blankets. "My name is Thomas Ashford. I have a ranch about 3 miles south of here. We need to get you warm, and we need to do it fast, or you will lose those toes for certain." "I cannot feel them," she admitted. "That is what worries me." He wrapped blankets around her shoulders, then without asking permission, scooped her up in his arms as though she weighed nothing. "My horse is just outside. I am going to take you to my place. Your wagon will have to wait until the storm passes." "I cannot just leave everything," she protested weakly. "You can and you will, because everything you own is worthless if you are dead." His tone brooked no argument. He carried her to the tailgate, then paused. "Hold tight to me. It is going to be rough." She wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling the solid strength of him, the warmth that radiated through his coat. He jumped down from the wagon and immediately sank knee-deep in snow. His horse, a massive roan gelding, stood waiting with the patience of a saint. Thomas lifted her into the saddle, then swung up behind her, pulling her back against his chest. "Go on, Red," he said to the horse, and they began moving through the storm. The ride was every bit as rough as he had promised. The wind tore at them with icy claws, and the snow fell so thick she could barely see Red's ears in front of them. But Thomas guided the horse with confidence, leaning down to speak directions into the animal's ear, and gradually buildings began to take shape through the white curtain. A barn, a house, a fence line. Thomas dismounted in front of the barn and carried her inside, where the relief from the wind was immediate and glorious. The barn was warm with animal heat, smelling of hay and horses and cattle. He set her down on a bench, then went to remove Red's saddle and bridle. "I will get you to the house in just a moment," he said, working quickly. "Red saved both our lives tonight. He deserves proper care first." Abigail watched him through heavy eyelids as he rubbed the horse down, checked his hooves, made sure he had hay and water. There was a gentleness in how he handled the animal that spoke of deep affection. When he was satisfied, he returned to her and once again lifted her into his arms. The house was small but well built, a single-story structure with thick walls and real glass windows. He kicked the door open and carried her inside, depositing her in a chair near the fireplace. Within minutes, he had a fire roaring, filling the room with blessed heat. "Let me see your hands and feet," he said, kneeling in front of her. She let him remove her gloves and boots, too exhausted to protest. His fingers were surprisingly gentle as he examined hers, then moved to her toes. His expression grew serious. "They are white as milk," he said, "but I do not see any black spots yet, which is good. We need to warm them slowly. Too fast and it will be agony, but we have no choice." He disappeared into another room and returned with a basin of water that steamed slightly. "This is lukewarm, not hot. I know it is tempting to go straight to heat, but trust me, this is better." He placed her feet in the water and she gasped at the sensation. It felt scalding even though she could see the water was barely warm. Pain began radiating up her legs as circulation returned. "I know it hurts," Thomas said quietly, "but it is a good sign, means the tissue is still alive." Tears streamed down Abigail's face, though she was not sure if they came from the pain or from relief or from the overwhelming strangeness of this night. A few hours ago she had been certain she would die, and now she was sitting in a stranger's house while he tended to her with the care one might show an injured bird. "What were you doing out in this storm?" he asked as he worked. "Traveling to California," she said. "I left Virginia City 3 days ago. The weather was clear when I started. I thought I could make it through the pass before the next storm hit." "Virginia City? You came all that way alone?" "I had no choice. There is nothing for me back there. My family is gone. I sold everything we owned to buy that wagon and supplies. California is supposed to have opportunities for women who are willing to work." Thomas's expression softened. "I am sorry about your family, but traveling alone in winter through the Sierra passes." That is deadly dangerous even in good weather. You are lucky you are alive. I know that now. She looked down at her reddening feet. I suppose I was foolish. Everyone in Virginia City told me to wait until spring, but I thought I knew better. I was so eager to leave to start fresh somewhere new. Wanting a new start is not foolish, Thomas said. He began wrapping her feet in soft cloths. But you have to be smart about how you go after it. These mountains do not forgive mistakes. He moved to her hands next, placing them in a second basin of lukewarm water. The pain was worse here, sharp and burning, and she had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. Tell me about yourself, Thomas said, clearly trying to distract her. What did you do in Virginia City? I worked as a seamstress. My mother taught me before she died. I made dresses for the miners' wives, altered clothes, repaired things. It was steady work, but the town was dying. The silver mines are playing out and people are leaving. I could see there would be nothing left in a few years, so I decided to go while I still had money for the journey. That took courage, Thomas said. A lot of people would just stay and hope for the best, or foolishness, as we established. She managed a weak smile. What about you? How does a man end up ranching alone in the mountains in the middle of winter? I am not alone exactly. I have 3 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse, but they went down to Carson City 2 days ago for supplies. They are probably stuck there until the storm passes. He finished wrapping her hands and sat back on his heels. As for how I ended up here, I bought this place 4 years ago with money I saved from working cattle drives. It is not much, but it is mine. I run about 200 head of cattle and some horses. In the summer, I take livestock to sell in California, actually. It is good money if you can get them over the mountains. So you know the passes well. Well enough to know you never try them alone in winter. He stood and went to the kitchen area, returning with a cup of coffee that steamed invitingly. Drink this. You need to warm up from the inside, too. The coffee was strong and bitter and wonderful. Abigail sipped it gratefully, feeling warmth spread through her chest. Thomas poured a cup for himself and settled into the chair across from her. You will stay here until the storm passes and until I am sure you will not lose any toes, he said. It was not a question. After that, we will figure out what to do about your wagon and your journey. I cannot impose on you like that. You are not imposing, I offered. Besides, it is not as though you have much choice. You cannot walk 3 miles through snow to get back to your wagon, and even if you could, the wagon is not going anywhere until spring. The pass is closed now. Nothing is getting through until the thaw. The reality of her situation settled over Abigail like a heavy blanket. She was stranded. Everything she owned was sitting in a wagon buried in snow, and she was dependent on the charity of a man she had met less than an hour ago. I will work to earn my keep, she said firmly. I am a good seamstress and a decent cook. I can clean, tend animals, whatever you need. I will not be a burden. Thomas studied her over the rim of his coffee cup, and something like respect flickered in his blue eyes. Fair enough. I will not turn down help, especially with the hands away. But first you need to rest and heal. Can you feel your feet yet? She wiggled her toes experimentally and winced. Yes, they hurt. Good. That is very good. He stood and stretched, and Abigail noticed for the first time how tall he was, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean build of a man who worked hard every day. I am going to make us some supper. Are you hungry? She realized she was famished. She had eaten nothing since dawn, and even that had been only a piece of bread and some dried meat. Starving. Thomas proved to be a competent cook, producing a simple but hearty meal of beans, bacon, and fresh bread that was far better than anything Abigail had managed to make on her camp stove. They ate in companionable silence, too hungry for much conversation. When the meal was finished, Thomas showed her to a small bedroom off the main room. It was simply furnished with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a washstand, but it looked like paradise to Abigail. "This was supposed to be a guest room," Thomas said, looking slightly embarrassed. "I built this house bigger than I needed, thinking maybe someday I would have a family to fill it. So far it has just been me and the occasional hand who needs a place to sleep off too much whiskey." "It is perfect," Abigail said. "Thank you, Thomas. You saved my life tonight." He ducked his head, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. But not anyone was there. You were. She met his eyes steadily. "I will not forget that." He nodded once, then back toward the door. "There are extra blankets in the dresser if you need them." "Sleep well, Miss Turner." "Abigail," she said. "Please call me Abigail." "Abigail," he repeated, and she liked the way her name sounded in his deep voice. "Sleep well, Abigail." She slept for 12 hours straight, waking to bright sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. She rose carefully, testing her feet. They were sore and tender, but she could walk on them, which was a relief. She found clean clothes laid out on the dresser, men's clothes, but they would do. She rolled up the trouser legs and shirt sleeves, cinched the belt tight, and padded out into the main room. Thomas was at the stove, cooking what smelled like bacon and eggs. He turned when he heard her, and a smile crossed his face. "You are awake. How do you feel?" "Sore but alive." "Is the storm over?" "Mostly. Still snowing, but the wind has died down. I checked on the animals this morning. Everyone is fine." He plated food and brought it to the table. "Sit down and eat. Then I will take a look at your feet again." Over breakfast, they fell into easy conversation. Thomas told her about the ranch, about the challenges of raising cattle in mountain country, about the summer drives to California, where he sold his stock for good prices in Sacramento and San Francisco. Abigail told him about growing up in Missouri, about the journey west with her family before the war, about losing everyone she loved to disease and conflict and simple bad luck. "You have had a hard time of it," Thomas said quietly. "No harder than most. The war was hard on everyone." "At least I survived." She pushed her empty plate away. "What about your family? You said you were planning for one someday." "I was engaged once," Thomas said, staring into his coffee. "Girl named Sarah from Carson City. We were supposed to marry 5 years ago, but she decided ranch life was too hard and too lonely. She married a banker instead. Lives in San Francisco now, or so I heard. I am sorry. I am not anymore. If she could not handle a little hardship, she was not the right woman for me." He looked up, meeting Abigail's eyes. "I want someone strong, someone who can face trouble without breaking, someone who would ride out a blizzard instead of running from it." There was something in his gaze that made Abigail's heart beat faster. She looked away, suddenly shy. "Well, I rode into a blizzard and nearly died, so perhaps I am not the best example of good judgment." "But you survived," Thomas said. "And you did not panic. You had a gun and you used it to try to defend yourself. You stayed in the wagon instead of trying to run through the storm. You did everything right given the circumstances. That takes strength." The days that followed fell into a comfortable routine. The snow continued on and off, sometimes heavy, sometimes just light flurries, keeping them effectively isolated from the outside world. Thomas's ranch hands did not return from Carson City, presumably waiting out the weather there. So it was just the two of them, working together to care for the animals and maintain the ranch. Abigail insisted on earning her keep, and she threw herself into work despite Thomas's protests that she should rest. She cooked meals, washed clothes, mended torn shirts and worn trousers, cleaned the house until it gleamed. When she finished indoor tasks, she bundled up and helped Thomas with the animals, learning to feed cattle, muck stalls, and curry horses. The work was hard but satisfying in a way her seamstress work had never been. She found herself watching Thomas when he was not looking, noticing small things about him. The way he hummed under his breath when he worked, the gentleness with which he handled the animals, the laugh lines around his eyes, the competent way his hands moved whether he was mending a fence or cooking dinner. He was handsome, she admitted to herself, but more than that, he was kind and steady and real in a way that made her feel safe for the first time in years. Thomas seemed to be watching her too. She would catch his eyes on her across the dinner table, or feel his gaze following her as she moved around the house. When their hands accidentally touched passing a plate or reaching for the same tool, there was always a moment where neither of them pulled away, a spark of connection that made her breath catch. One evening, a week after her rescue, they sat by the fire after supper, Abigail mending one of Thomas's shirts while he worked on repairing a bridle. The wind howled outside, but the house was warm and comfortable, filled with the soft sounds of their work. "I have been thinking," Thomas said suddenly, "about your situation." Abigail looked up from her sewing. "What about it? The pass will not be clear until April at the earliest. Your wagon is buried, and even when we can get to it, it will take time to dig it out and assess the damage. You said yourself you have no reason to go back to Virginia City." He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "What I am trying to say is you could stay here, not just until spring, permanently." Her heart began to pound. "Stay here. As what?" "As whatever you want to be." He set down the bridle and looked at her directly. "I could use a partner, Abigail, someone to help run this place. It is too much work for one man, and I have been thinking about expanding, maybe getting more cattle, some sheep, chickens. But I cannot do it alone. You are offering me a job. I am offering you a home." His voice was low and earnest. "And maybe, if you were interested, something more than that eventually. I know we have only known each other a week, but I feel like I have known you longer. You fit here, in this house, on this ranch, with me." Abigail set down her sewing, her hands trembling slightly. "Thomas, I do not know what to say." "Say you will think about it at least. You do not have to decide right now, but I want you to know the offer is there." He stood, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she had come to recognize as nervousness. "I care about you, Abigail. I think I started caring the moment I pulled you out of that wagon, half frozen and terrified but still fighting. I have never met a woman like you." She rose to face him, her heart in her throat. "I care about you too. I have been trying not to because it seemed foolish to develop feelings for someone I might have to leave in a few weeks, but I cannot help it." "Then do not leave." He reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "Stay with me. Give this a chance. Give us a chance." Abigail looked into his eyes, seeing hope and fear and longing mirrored there. She thought about the life she had been traveling toward in California, a life of uncertainty and loneliness, trying to make her way as a single woman in a strange place. Then she thought about what Thomas was offering, a home, a partnership, a man who looked at her like she was something precious and rare. "Yes," she whispered, "I will stay." Thomas's face lit up with a joy so pure it made her breath catch. "Truly, truly." She smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "On one condition. Name it. We do this properly. I will stay and work as your partner on the ranch, but if we are going to be more than that, we court properly. I will not have people saying I moved in with you like some kind of woman of ill repute." Thomas laughed, a sound of pure delight. "Abigail Turner, you are the most proper half-frozen woman I have ever rescued from wolves. Yes, we will do this exactly as you want. I will court you like a gentleman, and we will do everything right." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so old-fashioned and sweet it made her want to cry. This was real, she thought. This was actually happening. She had ridden into a blizzard expecting to find a new life in California. And instead, she had found something better right here in the Nevada mountains. The courting that followed was unlike anything Abigail had experienced before. There were no fancy restaurants or theater performances, no way for Thomas to take her out in society properly. But he found other ways to show his intentions were honorable and serious. He brought her wildflowers that somehow bloomed even in the snow-hardy mountain species that clung to sheltered spots. He read to her in the evenings from his small collection of books, his deep voice bringing poetry and adventure stories to life. He carved her a beautiful wooden box for her sewing supplies, the lid inlaid with different colored woods in the pattern of mountains and stars. He taught her to ride properly, sitting behind her on red at first to show her the balance, then giving her a gentle mare of her own and riding beside her through the snow-covered valleys. And he talked to her, really talked, sharing his dreams and fears and the story of his life. He had grown up in Colorado, the youngest of 5 brothers, and had left home at 17 to make his own way. He had worked as a cowhand, a trail boss, a ranch foreman, saving every penny until he could buy this land. He wanted to build something lasting, something he could pass down to children someday. He wanted a real family, the kind where everyone sat around the dinner table together and worked side by side and belonged to each other completely. "That is what I want too," Abigail told him one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. She was bundled in a thick coat and blankets, tucked against his side for warmth. "I spent so many years losing people. I want to find people I get to keep." "You can keep me," Thomas said, his arm tightening around her shoulders, "for as long as you want me. That might be a very long time. I am counting on it." The kiss, when it finally came, was worth the wait. They were in the barn, working together to tend a cow who had gotten into some bad hay and needed nursing. Abigail was holding the cow's head, speaking softly to keep her calm, while Thomas administered medicine. When the cow was settled and resting comfortably, Thomas turned to Abigail with that familiar soft look in his eyes. "You are amazing," he said. "You know that." "I am covered in cow slobber and smell like a barn," she countered, but she was smiling. "You are still amazing." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his hand lingering against her cheek. "Abigail, I know we agreed to take things slow, but I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I love you." The words came out simple and direct, with no embellishment or poetry, just raw honesty. "I am in love with you. I think I have been since the moment I saw you refusing to give up even when you were surrounded by wolves in a blizzard. You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever met, and I do not want to spend another day without telling you how I feel." Abigail felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too, Thomas. I was afraid to say it first, afraid you might think it was too soon or that I was just grateful for the rescue. But it is not gratitude. It is real." He cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears on her cheeks. "Can I kiss you, please?" The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, his lips soft against hers. Then it deepened, becoming more certain as she pressed closer to him, her arms sliding around his neck. He tasted like coffee and winter air and something uniquely him, and she never wanted it to end. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. Abigail laughed, giddy and breathless. "You just told me you loved me 30 seconds ago. And I will tell you again every day for the rest of our lives if you say yes. Marry me, Abigail. Be my partner in every way. Help me run this ranch and build a life here. Have children with me if we are blessed with them. Grow old with me. Just say yes." She pulled back enough to look into his eyes, seeing complete sincerity there, and wondered how she had gotten so lucky. 2 months ago she had been alone in the world, heading toward an uncertain future with nothing but determination and a wagon full of possessions. Now she had a man who loved her, a place to call home, and a future that suddenly looked bright and full of possibility. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Thomas let out a whoop of joy that startled the cow and made Abigail laugh. He picked her up and spun her around right there in the barn, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her again, longer and deeper, and she lost herself in the feeling of being loved and wanted and home. They were married 6 weeks later, in early April, when the first signs of spring were beginning to show and the passes were starting to clear. Thomas's 3 ranch hands had finally made it back from Carson City, bringing with them supplies and news of the outside world. They were pleased to discover their boss was getting married, and they helped prepare the ranch for the small ceremony. The wedding itself took place in the parlor of the house, with a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through performing the service. Abigail wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Thomas had bought in Virginia City, a simple but elegant design in dove gray with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Thomas wore his best suit, his hair freshly trimmed and his mustache neatly combed. The ranch hands served as witnesses, along with 2 neighboring ranchers and their wives who had ridden over for the occasion. The ceremony was brief and heartfelt. When the preacher asked Thomas if he took Abigail to be his lawfully wedded wife, his "I do" rang out strong and clear. When Abigail gave her own "I do," her voice shook with emotion but never wavered. Thomas slid a simple gold band onto her finger, one he had ordered specially from Carson City, and she did the same for him. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher said. "You may kiss your bride." Thomas did, thoroughly and enthusiastically, to the applause and good-natured hooting of their small audience. When they broke apart, both grinning like fools, Abigail felt like her heart might burst with happiness. The celebration that followed was joyful and lively. The ranch hands had roasted a pig and prepared all manner of side dishes. The neighbors had brought pies and cakes. Someone produced a fiddle, and there was dancing in the barn, Thomas swinging Abigail around to lively reels until they were both breathless and laughing. Late in the evening, when the guests had finally departed and the ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Thomas carried Abigail over the threshold of the house that was now officially hers. He set her down gently in the bedroom, which had been transformed with wildflowers and new curtains. "Are you happy?" he asked, his hands settling on her waist. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Abigail said honestly. She reached up to touch his face, marveling that she had the right to do so now that this wonderful man was her husband. "When I left Virginia City, I thought happiness was something I had to chase to California, but it was here all along, waiting for me in the snow." "We were both waiting," Thomas said. "I just did not know it until I found you." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, full of whispered words and gentle touches, and the profound intimacy of 2 people choosing to become one. Afterward, as they lay together in the darkness, Abigail felt a peace settle over her that she had not known since before her parents died. She had found her place in the world. She had found her person. She was home. The first year of marriage brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Running a ranch was hard work, demanding long hours and constant attention. Cattle got sick, fences needed repair, predators threatened the livestock, and the weather was always either too wet or too dry. But Abigail threw herself into the work with determination, learning everything Thomas could teach her about ranching and livestock. She discovered she had a talent for handling horses. The animals seemed to sense her gentle firmness, responding to her in ways that made even the ranch hands take notice. Thomas eventually put her in charge of breaking and training new horses, a job she loved. There was something magical about earning the trust of a wild creature, teaching it that humans could be kind and fair. She also transformed the house into a real home. She sewed curtains for every window, hooked rugs for the floors, and planted a garden that produced vegetables all summer. She learned to make butter and cheese, to preserve food for winter, to cook for hungry ranch hands. The house that had once been a lonely bachelor's dwelling became warm and welcoming, a place where people gathered and laughed and felt comfortable. In the evenings, after the work was done, she and Thomas would sit together on the porch or by the fire, talking about the day and making plans for the future. They discussed expanding the herd, building a better barn, maybe buying the adjacent property if it ever came up for sale. They talked about children, about how many they wanted and what they would name them and what kind of parents they hoped to be. "I want our children to feel safe," Abigail said one night, her head resting on Thomas's shoulder. "I want them to grow up knowing they are loved and protected. I never want them to feel as alone as I felt after my family died." "They will not," Thomas promised, kissing the top of her head. "They will have both of us, and they will have this land, and they will have roots that go deep. They will always know where they belong." The following spring, Abigail discovered she was pregnant. She told Thomas over breakfast, unable to keep the news to herself even though she had planned a more romantic revelation. "I am going to have a baby," she blurted out as he reached for the coffee pot. Thomas froze, then slowly set down the pot and turned to stare at her. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be. I missed my monthly courses and I have been sick every morning for 2 weeks. I think it happened around Christmas." A grin spread across Thomas's face, growing wider and wider until he was beaming. "We are going to have a baby. Abigail, we are going to have a baby." He pulled her out of her chair and into his arms, holding her carefully now, as though she were made of glass. "Are you happy?" he asked. "So happy," she said, feeling tears on her cheeks. "I know it will be hard, but Thomas, we are going to be parents. We are going to have a family." "The family I always dreamed of," he said, his own voice rough with emotion. "With the woman I love more than anything in this world." The pregnancy was not easy. Abigail was sick for the first 3 months, barely able to keep food down. Then, as summer arrived, she grew huge and uncomfortable, swelling in the heat. But Thomas was attentive and patient, taking on extra work so she could rest, bringing her cool drinks and rubbing her aching back, reading to her in the evenings when she was too tired to do anything but lie down. The baby came in late September, during the harvest season when the mountains were painted gold and red with autumn colors. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours. The nearest doctor was in Carson City, too far to reach in time, so it was just Thomas and one of the ranch hands' wives, a practical woman named Mary who had delivered 6 babies of her own. Abigail screamed and wept and was certain she was going to die, but Thomas never left her side. He held her hand and wiped her forehead and told her she was strong. She could do this, he believed in her. And finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, the baby emerged into the world with a loud, indignant cry. "It is a boy," Mary announced, holding up the squirming, red-faced infant. "A healthy, perfect boy." Thomas looked down at Abigail with wonder in his eyes. "We have a son." "We have a son," she repeated, exhausted but elated. Mary cleaned the baby and wrapped him in soft blankets, then placed him in Abigail's arms. He was beautiful, with a wispy covering of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn blue like his father's. His tiny fingers wrapped around Abigail's thumb with surprising strength, and she felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." They named him Theodore James Ashford after Thomas's father and Abigail's brother. They called him Theo, and he became the center of their universe. Thomas was a natural father, patient and playful, delighting in every milestone. He built a cradle with his own hands, carved wooden toys, and spent hours walking the floor with Theo when the baby was fussy. Abigail marveled at the transformation in their lives. The house that had been quiet now rang with baby cries and laughter. The bedroom where she and Thomas had shared so many peaceful nights was now interrupted by feedings and diaper changes. But neither of them minded. This was what they had wanted, what they had dreamed of, a family, noisy and messy and utterly perfect. As Theo grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Thomas bought the adjacent property, doubling their grazing land. They increased the herd to 400 head and added a flock of sheep. Abigail's horse training business brought in extra income, as word spread about her skill. They hired 2 more ranch hands and built a proper bunkhouse for them. Money was never abundant, but it was sufficient. They lived simply but well, with enough to eat and warm clothes and a solid roof over their heads. More importantly, they had each other, and they had Theo, and they had work they both found meaningful. When Theo was 2 years old, Abigail became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect. She continued working almost up until the day of delivery, though Thomas fussed over her constantly. Their second child, a daughter they named Emily Rose Ashford, arrived on a sunny May morning with far less drama than her brother. She was a calm, content baby who rarely cried and seemed to find everything fascinating. She had Abigail's red-brown hair and Thomas's blue eyes, a combination that made her absolutely beautiful. "Now we have one of each," Thomas said, cradling Emily while Theo climbed into bed beside Abigail. "Our family is complete." "It is perfect," Abigail agreed, looking at her husband and her children and feeling overwhelming gratitude for the life they had built together. But life, as always, continued to surprise them. 2 years after Emily's birth, when Abigail was certain her childbearing years were behind her at 30 years old, she discovered she was pregnant again. This time she carried twins, a fact that did not become apparent until they were born. 2 more boys whom they named Samuel and Daniel. "4 children," Thomas said, looking slightly dazed as he held one twin while Abigail nursed the other. "We have 4 children. Are you complaining?" Abigail asked, amused by his expression. "Not for a second. I just need to build onto the house. We are running out of bedrooms." He did just that, adding 2 more rooms and expanding the kitchen. The house that had once seemed too big for one man now felt full and alive, constantly echoing with children's voices. Theo grew into a responsible older brother, helping with his younger siblings. Emily was gentle and nurturing, already showing signs of her mother's skill with animals. The twins were mischievous and energetic, keeping everyone on their toes. The years passed in a blur of activity and love. Thomas and Abigail worked side by side, raising their children and building their ranch into one of the most successful operations in the region. They faced droughts and harsh winters, dealt with rustlers and predators, weathered economic downturns and good years alike. But they faced everything together, their partnership as strong as it had been on that first day when Thomas had ridden out of a blizzard to save her life. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Abigail riding up to the ridge where he had first spotted her wagon surrounded by wolves. It was a beautiful summer evening, with wildflowers blooming across the meadows and the mountains purple against the sky. "Do you remember that night?" Thomas asked as they sat on their horses, looking down at the valley where the ranch spread out below them. "Every detail," Abigail said. "I remember thinking I was going to die. I remember the fear and the cold and the absolute certainty that it was over. And then I showed up and ruined your dramatic exit," Thomas teased. She laughed. "And then you showed up and gave me a new life, a better life than I ever could have imagined." She reached over and took his hand. "I was traveling to California looking for opportunities and fresh starts, but my real journey ended right here with you." "Our journey is not over," Thomas said, squeezing her hand. "We still have so much ahead of us. Watching our children grow up, maybe becoming grandparents someday, building this ranch into something we can pass down through generations, growing old together." "That sounds perfect," Abigail said softly. They sat there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something lasting and true. Below them, smoke rose from the chimney of their house, and Abigail could imagine their children inside, probably getting into some kind of mischief while Mary watched over them. This was home. Not California with its ocean views and orange groves, not Missouri with its memories of loss. But here, in the Nevada mountains, with a man who loved her and children who filled their lives with joy and land that they had worked together to build into something valuable. "Thank you," she said suddenly. Thomas looked at her quizzically. "For what?" "For riding out in that blizzard. For not turning back when the storm got bad. For giving me a chance when I was just a stranded stranger. For loving me." "Abigail Ashford," Thomas said, his voice warm with affection. "Loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done. It is everything else that takes work." She laughed and leaned over to kiss him, nearly falling out of her saddle in the process. He caught her, steadying her, and they rode back down to the ranch together as the first stars began to appear overhead. The children were indeed causing chaos when they arrived home. Theo and Emily were trying to cook dinner and had somehow managed to get flour on every surface in the kitchen. The twins had escaped their caretaker and were chasing the barn cats. But instead of getting angry, Thomas and Abigail looked at each other and started laughing. This was their life, messy and loud and unpredictable. But it was theirs, built from nothing but determination and love and the willingness to take a chance on each other during a blizzard 10 years ago. As the years continued to pass, the children grew and changed. Theo developed into a tall, serious young man with his father's work ethic and his mother's compassion. He loved the ranch and showed every sign of wanting to take it over someday. Emily proved to have Abigail's gift with horses and her father's head for business, a combination that served her well. She talked about starting her own horse breeding operation someday. The twins remained inseparable and mischievous, but they were smart and capable when they put their minds to work. Thomas and Abigail watched their children grow with pride and occasional terror. Parenthood, they discovered, never got easier. The challenges simply changed. Where once they worried about keeping babies alive and healthy, now they worried about teaching values and preparing their children for the harsh realities of the world. "You think we are doing it right?" Abigail asked Thomas one night after a particularly difficult conversation with teenage Theo about responsibility and choices. "I think we are doing our best," Thomas said. "And I think our best is pretty good. Look at them, Abigail. They are kind kids. They work hard. They care about each other. Whatever mistakes we make, we are getting the important things right." When Abigail was 38 and Thomas was 41, they became grandparents for the first time. Theo, at age 20, married a young woman named Catherine from Carson City, and within a year they had a baby girl. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Abigail was overwhelmed with emotion. "This is what it was all for," she told Thomas that night. All the hard work and struggle and worry, it was to build something that lasts, something we can pass down. We did that, Thomas said, pulling her close. We built something real and lasting. And it all started with you being stubborn enough to try to cross the mountains in winter. And you being brave enough to ride out in a blizzard to chase off some wolves. Best decision I ever made. They continued working the ranch well into their 50s, though they gradually turned over more responsibility to Theo and the younger ranch hands. Thomas taught his son everything he knew about cattle and horses and land management. Abigail taught Emily her horse training methods and shared her herb garden knowledge with Catherine. Emily eventually married a neighboring rancher's son, and did indeed start her own horse breeding operation on land adjacent to the family ranch. The twins both showed interest in pursuing education beyond the ranch, with Samuel wanting to become a veterinarian and Daniel interested in law. Thomas and Abigail supported both endeavors, proud that they could afford to send their sons to school. "We did good," Thomas said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over land that now included not just their original ranch but properties belonging to two of their children. "Look at what we built, Abigail. Not just land and cattle and houses, but a real family. Roots that go deep." "I never imagined this," Abigail admitted. "When I was trapped in that wagon with wolves circling, I could not have dreamed that my life would turn out so well, that I would have you and the children and grandchildren and all of this. Sometimes the best things come from the worst situations," Thomas said. "That blizzard brought us together. You ever wonder what would have happened if you had not ridden out that night, if you had stayed safe at home instead of going to check the ridge?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I do not wonder because I know I would have ridden out. Even if I had not seen your wagon, even if there had been no one to rescue, I would have gone. It is who I am. I cannot stay safe inside when there might be someone who needs help." "I know," Abigail said, reaching over to take his hand. His fingers were gnarled now with arthritis, the knuckles swollen from decades of hard work, but his grip was still strong. "It is one of the things I love most about you. You have always been a man who rides toward trouble instead of away from it. And you have always been a woman brave enough to face trouble head-on," Thomas countered. "We make a good team." "The best team," Abigail agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade from the sky. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Someone was cooking dinner, the smell of roasting meat drifting from one of the houses. A dog barked, cattle lowed, horses nickered in the pasture. These were the sounds of home, of family, of a life well lived. These were the sounds that had filled Abigail's days for more than 30 years now, the soundtrack to a story that had begun with terror and isolation, but had transformed into something beautiful. When Thomas and Abigail celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a party that seemed to include half the county. The ranch was full of people, food, music, and laughter. There were speeches and toasts and embarrassing stories told by grown children about their parents. "To Thomas and Abigail," Theo said, raising his glass. "They taught us that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every day. They showed us what it means to build something lasting, to work hard, to face challenges together, and to never give up on each other or your dreams. Mom and Dad, you are our heroes." Abigail cried, of course. She had become a woman who cried easily in her older age, moved to tears by both joy and sorrow. Thomas put his arm around her, and she leaned into him, marveling that after 40 years, his embrace still felt like the safest place in the world. "Thank you," she whispered to him, just loud enough for him to hear over the noise of the party. "For what?" he asked, as he had so many times over the years. For everything. For saving me, for loving me, for building this life with me, for being exactly who you are. Thank you for saying yes, Thomas replied. For staying when you could have left, for believing in us, for making me the happiest man alive. They kissed, sweetly and tenderly, while their family cheered around them. It was perfect, Abigail thought. All of it was absolutely perfect. As they moved into their 60s, Thomas and Abigail finally fully retired from ranching, turning the operation over to Theo while they moved into a smaller house on the property. They spent their days doing easier work, tending a garden, caring for grandchildren, maintaining family relationships. Thomas carved intricate wooden toys for the youngest grandchildren. Abigail quilted and sewed, creating heirlooms she hoped would last for generations. They took long walks together in the evenings, moving slower now but still enjoying the beauty of the land they loved. They talked about everything and nothing, the easy conversation of two people who had spent a lifetime together and knew each other's thoughts almost before they were spoken. "You have any regrets?" Thomas asked her one evening as they sat by the creek that ran through the property. Abigail thought carefully before answering. "I regret losing my family so young. I wish my parents could have met you and known our children. I wish my brother had survived the war. But as for my choices, my life, no, I do not regret a single moment since the day you pulled me out of that wagon. Not even the hard times. The years when money was tight, when we worked until we could barely stand, when the children were sick, or the cattle died, or the weather destroyed our crops. Not even then," Abigail said firmly. "Those hard times made the good times sweeter. And we faced them together, which made all the difference. I would rather have a hard life with you than an easy life with anyone else." Thomas smiled, the expression crinkling the weathered skin around his eyes. "I feel the same way. You are my best friend, Abigail. My partner, my lover, my wife, but also my best friend. That is the secret, I think. That is why we lasted when so many others do not. Because we genuinely like each other," Abigail agreed. "Not just love, though there is plenty of that, but we actually enjoy spending time together. Even now, after 45 years, I would rather be with you than anywhere else with anyone else." "Same," Thomas said, taking her hand. "Always and forever." They lived to see great-grandchildren born, tiny perfect beings who carried their legacy forward into the future. They lived to see Theo's successful expansion of the ranch, Emily's horse breeding operation gain national recognition, Samuel become a respected veterinarian, and Daniel pass the bar exam and open a law practice in Carson City. They lived to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by more family than either of them had dreamed possible back when they were young and just starting out. 50 years since that day in the small parlor when they had promised to love each other for better or worse, in sickness and health, until death parted them. "We made it," Abigail said to Thomas that night, after all the guests had gone and they were alone in their bed. 50 years. Half a century together. "Best 50 years of my life," Thomas said, holding her close. "I love you more now than I did on our wedding day. I did not think that was possible, but it is. You get better every year." "Liar," Abigail said, but she was smiling. "I am old and wrinkled, and my hands shake, and I cannot remember names anymore." "You are beautiful," Thomas insisted. "You were beautiful at 23 when I pulled you out of that wagon, half frozen and terrified. You were beautiful at 30 when you were pregnant with the twins. You are beautiful now at 73. You will always be beautiful to me." Abigail turned in his arms to face him, studying the face she knew better than her own. His hair was completely white now, his face lined with age and weather and life. His body was not as strong as it once was, troubled by arthritis and old injuries. But his eyes were still that same incredible blue, and when he looked at her, she still saw the young cowboy who had ridden through a blizzard to save her life. "I love you, Thomas Ashford," she said. "Thank you for the best 50 years any woman could ask for." "I love you, Abigail Ashford," he replied. "Thank you for being my everything." They fell asleep that night as they had for thousands of nights before, wrapped in each other's arms, safe and warm and together. Outside, the Nevada wind whispered through the mountains, carrying with it the scent of sage and snow and wild things. But inside, there was only love and contentment and the profound peace of two souls who had found each other against impossible odds and had chosen each other every single day since. Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, at the age of 78. He simply did not wake up one morning, slipping away so gently that Abigail, lying beside him, did not realize he was gone until she tried to wake him for breakfast. The doctor said it was his heart, worn out from a lifetime of hard work and good living. The funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire county. Thomas had been well loved and respected, known for his fairness, his generosity, and his unwavering integrity. Story after story was told of how he had helped someone in need, given someone a job when they were desperate, offered advice or assistance without being asked. But for Abigail, the loss was devastating. For 52 years, Thomas had been her constant companion, her partner in everything. The house felt empty without him, the bed too large, the silence too loud. She moved through the days in a fog of grief, going through the motions but feeling hollow inside. It was her children who saved her, just as Thomas would have wanted. They gathered around her, making sure she ate and slept and had company. The grandchildren visited constantly, filling the house with noise and life. Great-grandchildren climbed into her lap and demanded stories about their great-grandfather, and in telling those stories, Abigail found a kind of healing. She began writing everything down, all the memories and stories and lessons learned over a lifetime. She wrote about that first night when Thomas had rescued her from the wolves, about their courtship and marriage, about raising children and building a ranch, about 52 years of partnership and love. She wrote it all in neat script in a series of journals, wanting to preserve the story for future generations. "I want them to know," she told Theo when he asked what she was doing. "I want your grandchildren and great-grandchildren to know where they came from. I want them to know about the man who built all of this, not just the land and houses but the family. I want them to know about love and commitment and choosing each other every day even when it is hard." "They will know," Theo assured her. "We will make sure they know." Abigail lived for 3 more years after Thomas's death. She spent that time surrounded by family, watching new babies be born and young people fall in love, and the ranch continue to prosper under Theo's management. She spent it sharing wisdom gained from a long life, offering advice when asked and sometimes when not asked. She spent it in the garden and on the porch and walking slowly through land that had been her home for over 50 years. On a warm September evening, sitting in her chair on the porch with a blanket across her lap, Abigail closed her eyes and simply did not open them again. She was 78 years old, the same age Thomas had been when he passed. She died peacefully, without pain or fear, slipping away as gently as her husband had. The family buried her next to Thomas in the small cemetery on the ranch, under a large oak tree with a view of the mountains. The headstone was simple. Abigail Turner Ashford, 1848–1926, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. But to those who had known her, she was so much more than words on stone could capture. She was the woman who had faced down wolves in a blizzard and survived. She was the bride who had built a life from nothing but determination and love. She was the mother who had raised 4 children to be good, capable people. She was the grandmother and great-grandmother who had held a family together across generations. She was the partner who had worked beside her husband for 52 years, building something that would last long after they were both gone. Years later, when the journals were discovered and read, the family marveled at the story they told. It seemed almost impossible that their elderly grandmother had once been a young woman trapped in a wagon, certain she was going to die, only to be rescued by a cowboy who would become the love of her life. It seemed like something from a novel, too perfect and romantic to be real. But it was real. The ranch still stood, larger and more prosperous than ever. The family still gathered there for holidays and celebrations, now numbering in the dozens. The stories were still told, passed down from generation to generation. The story of Thomas and Abigail, the cowboy and the seamstress, who had found each other in a blizzard and had built an empire of love. And on winter nights when the snow fell heavy and the wind howled through the mountains, some claimed you could still feel them there on the ranch, walking hand in hand through the dusk, forever young and forever together. The way true love always is in the deepest part of the heart, where memory becomes legend and legend becomes eternal. Their great-great-grandchildren would eventually inherit the ranch, young people who never knew Thomas and Abigail, but who carried their legacy in their names and their faces and their values. They would read the journals and marvel at the story. They would visit the graves under the oak tree and leave flowers. They would tell their own children about the ancestors who had built everything they knew, and the story would live on, the way the best stories always do, not because it was extraordinary, though it was, but because it was true. Because 2 people had found each other against impossible odds and had chosen each other every single day. Because love, real love, the kind that builds and endures and transforms, was the most powerful force in the world. The ranch still stands today, in the capable hands of the 6th generation of Ashfords, a testament to what Thomas and Abigail built together. The main house has been expanded and modernized, but the original structure remains at its core. The barn where they first kissed still stands, carefully maintained. The cemetery under the oak tree is peaceful and well tended, a place where family members come to remember and reflect. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light is just right, and the wind carries the scent of sage and wildflowers, those who know the story say you can feel them there. Thomas and Abigail, still together, still in love, still watching over the family and the land they loved so much. It was a love that began with fear and danger, with wolves circling in the snow and a cowboy riding to the rescue. But it became something far greater, a partnership that lasted over 5 decades, a family that spanned generations, a legacy that would endure for centuries. It was proof that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the very best things, if we are brave enough to take the chances that are offered to us. Thomas had been brave enough to ride into a blizzard. Abigail had been brave enough to say yes to a future she had not planned. And together, they had been brave enough to build something beautiful and lasting and true. That was the real story, the one that mattered. Not just the dramatic rescue or the romantic courtship, but the daily choice to love each other, to work together, to build a life that meant something. That was what they had taught their children and grandchildren and all who came after. That was their true legacy. And so the story ends not with death but with continuity, not with loss but with legacy, not with an ending but with new beginnings as each generation takes up the story and carries it forward. Thomas and Abigail are gone, but what they built remains as solid and enduring as the mountains themselves. a testament to the power of love to transform lives and create something that lasts forever.